Okay, it has been a long week this week. I've been blasted at work with various meetings and online seminars that I've had to attend, but I'm here with you today on this fine Friday to give you my weekly movie and television show review video. And I've been busy this week with the videos, if you haven't seen. I also did a wrestling current events video and my latest WCW Nitro retrospective. So if you want to keep caught up on my videos, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos, and you can enjoy them at your leisure. So, with all that said, let's get started with the movie and television show reviews. The last few weeks, I've been doing, actually pretty much since I've started doing these, a thing that's been like kind of a constant as far as like the reviews that I've done has been going to Disney Plus and rewatching some of the Disney Afternoon cartoons. And this week I completed another one, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. Now, this is an interesting one because as a kid, I did not like Chip and Dale that much as characters. They were two characters that came from the classic era of animated shorts like the Golden Age. They were typically used as antagonists for Donald Duck, where they basically just drove him nuts. So I naturally hated them because Donald Duck's my boy. So I was like, yeah, screw those chipmunks. They're evil. It's weird. With cartoons, I typically always sided with the one that was like the one that's typically seen as the aggressor or viewed as the aggressor. But if you look at the situation, it's like, no, I feel like Jerry is more the asshole than Tom is. Jerry's the invader most of the time. Mice don't belong in the home anyway, so... Yeah, I kind of side with Tom. And Chip and Dale was a similar thing. It's like, look, Donald's just going about his business most of the time, and thare just ruining it because they're jerks. And I remember that one Christmas cartoon they did with Mickey Mouse and Pluto, where they basically torture Pluto, and it's like, what are you going after Pluto for? What are you doing? So I didn't like Chip and Dale that much. I liked them more than the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes equivalent to them, the Goofy Gophers. I never understood the Goofy Gophers. And typically I love Looney Tunes more than the Disney characters, but Goofy Gophers just made no sense to me. It's like, wait, so they're like British and polite, and that's the joke? I don't get it. Like, I never understood the Goofy Gophers. But Chip and Dale, two classic characters that Disney, in their infinite wisdom, decided, hey, if they're going to put... and this show actually predates Tailspin, but if they're going to put Baloo in an airplane and set him in the 1940s, yeah, Chip and Dale, they can be heroes and run their own organization of like their own super team where they run around and solve crimes and shit. So, not that crazy when you look at Tailspin. So, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, I remember the show quite well. It was one that I did watch, even though I wasn't excited for it because I went into the show initially as a kid not really being that interested in it because I didn't like Chip and Dale that much. But I did enjoy the show, and I think it is a good show for kids. Cute little animals running around. It's that typical, I talked about it a little bit with The Secret of Nim, but it's that typical, the small animals have their own little world that runs parallel to the human world, but the humans aren't aware of it. And it plays with that quite a bit, where there's a lot of scenes in the show where we see the Rescue Rangers hanging out at a police station, trying to get tips on the next crimes that they can help solve. So, that stuff is pretty interesting, to say the least. And as Chip and Dale form their own team, and you'll notice in the logo here, Chip and Dale got like outfits for this. Dale's outfit is modeled after Magnum PI. Chip's outfit is modeled after Indiana Jones, which are two very interesting sources of inspiration for two cartoon chipmunks. But hey, those things were pretty big in the 80s. So what do you want? And for the Rescue Rangers, they actually built up their team. It wasn't just Chip and Dale. They got other people to fill out the team. There was the Fly Zipper, who, man, to see a Disney-ized, like, cute and cuddly fly is really, really weird. He's got, like, I can't even describe, like, the design of Zipper. It's very Disney-ified. And no fly looks that adorable, but he's, like, the small, tough guy of the group. Then you get Monterey Jack, who can best be described as a Australian cheese addict, who completely loses it whenever he comes anywhere near cheese because he can smell it from a mile away. But he's also a bit of like the muscle of the group and can beat up any, obstacle that comes in their path. He serves a similar function in the video game, where he's able to like break open walls and stuff. And then there is Gadget, who is a mouse that is she is the tech person of the group and helps build all their vehicles and stuff. She builds the Ranger plane, which is a very iconic vehicle from the show. I feel like a lot of people have had the image of the Ranger plane kind of seared into their memories when they think about this show. And, I mean, it looks like she took like a detergent bottle and like a balloon and some rubber bands and some plungers and turned it into an airplane, which is pretty cool. And that was like her function on the show. And I've said this before, I always like the tech people in a team. It's like she would take these like normal household objects and turn it into some kind of a weapon or a vehicle or something like that. That was always neat to see. I was like, all right, what crazy stuff is she going to come up with? Because it's like the writers are coming up with, all right, what household objects can we turn into a plane today? And that type of fun stuff. The character of Gadget is also interesting, and I found this out fairly recently. Apparently, she is a religious icon in Russia. There is a religion dedicated to the character of Gadget from Chippendale Rescue Rangers in Russia. And I'm like, what? I've heard of like people taking their love of cartoons way too far, but that's another level I can't even begin to comprehend. But anyway, so the voice actors on here, Chippendale, I don't know who does the voice of Chippendale in this. I think it might be Tress MacNeille and Corey Burton, I believe. But their voices are so heavily altered to get the squeaking effect that you can't even tell who's doing it. But for the other characters, Gadget's played by Tress MacNeille, who is a terrific voice actress. I know her best from Animaniacs. She's actually returning to Animaniacs. She's also had a few guest spots on The Simpsons. She was the crazy cat lady. And anytime they needed a snooty executive, Tress MacNeille seemed to be the way to go with that. Like kind of a stuck-up female executive. She always filled that role pretty well. She also had a very interesting role on Avatar: The Last Airbender for one episode. I won't say what, but let's just say she's a terrific voice actress with a lot of range. I'll say that. And Monterey Jack, I believe, is played by Peter Cullen, or at least he starts off being played by Peter Cullen. I think maybe Jim Cummings took over later in the season. And Zipper, I have absolutely no idea who does the voice of Zipper because he just mostly mumbles most of the time anyway. But so there's some talented voice actors here, and it's a very creative setup with Chippendale having to solve all these crimes. And of course, when you solve crimes, you come across some villains. And the main villains of the show, number one is Fat Cat, who is, again, wonderfully voiced by Jim Cummings, doing somewhat of a Dom DeLuise impression. It feels like it's Dom DeLuise that he's trying to do. The design of the character also kind of looks like Zero Mostel. For those of you who have more of an older knowledge of celebrities, Zero Mostel was actually one of the stars. He played Max Bialystock in The Producers, my favorite comedy of all time. He was also in many other things. Very accomplished actor. Funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. He was in the movie version of that, just as an example. But Fat Cat is like this underground animal gangster that has his own gang and own like criminal organization within the animal world, and of course that he crosses paths with the Rescue Rangers many times. And another villain is the human mad scientist Dr. Norton Nimnol, who comes up with all these crazy harebrained ideas to help him with like world domination or to just get rich or anything like that. I think the first episode that he was in is probably the first episode of Rescue Rangers I ever saw, but there's one where, just to give an idea of like how kind of scatterbrained his ideas are, he invents this robot device that generates static electricity. And to generate the static electricity, he has to kidnap all these kittens. So he has mechanical bulldogs to kidnap kittens, and then this device takes the kittens and scrubs them hard to generate static electricity, which he then uses to power his own evil devices or something. And that robot static electricity device was actually, I believe, the first boss in the Chippendale NES game. Great game, by the way. That and DuckTales were two of the great ones on the NES. And Darkwing Duck had a good game too. Nobody talks about that one, but that was a good game too. And so I actually really liked Norton Liminal because it was always like a joy to say, all right, what kind of crazy shit is he going to do now? There's one episode where he steals a bunch of tap shoes and kidnaps penguins and gets them to tap dance so he can break off a piece of an iceberg that he can use as part of a scheme. There's another one where he creates like a 50-foot tall Jello mold, which he uses to generate earthquakes. And it's like, it's fun to see, like, I almost get the sense that the writers got a blast just coming up with whatever crazy thing they could come up with. And there were other side villains as well. There were other different situations that they dealt with. There was one episode where they came in contact with space aliens. The space aliens can shapeshift, and one of them took Dale's place. And there was a whole mix-up there. There was another episode where they go to watch a shuttle launch, and Chip and Dale accidentally get launched into space. There's one where they're trying to help out a guy, and they do it by parading around, by pretending there's a ghost dog, kind of like Hound of the Baskervilles, and there's a lot of Sherlock Holmes references in the episode. That type of stuff. So, and of course, there's the cola cult, where there's a cult of mice that worship soda pop. A lot of weird stuff going on, and very much in line with the Disney afternoon shows, where they just kind of took the approach of like, all right, what weird thing can we come up with to do this week? And it generated some fun stuff, and overall I do think it is a fun show. Probably better for kids. Now, on the rewatch, I gotta say, I actually like Tailspin better than Chip and Dale, and Tailspin doesn't always get the love. I feel like Chip and Dale is... that show does get a lot of love and is fondly remembered, and with good reason. It is a very imaginative and fun show for children, but on this recent rewatch, I was like, I think I kind of like Tailspin better. I think it was... Maybe it's because Tailspin has that, that entrepreneurial spirit of they have to keep the business afloat, and that's more of like an adult thing that I can kind of identify with now. And Chip and Dale doesn't really have that. It's just like a bunch of animals going off on adventures whenever duty calls or anything like that. So, but overall, it is a fun show, and it is another example of the high quality that was normal for the Disney afternoon shows. And it made for a delightful rewatch. Now, I did have my annoyances with it. Like, Dale gets ridiculously stupid at points, and it's kind of the Orko effect, where it's okay at first, but it feels like he gets dumber as the show progresses, and there comes a point where I'm like, why don't they just kick Dale out of the team? He's just useless. He's absolutely useless. And, so there are those minor annoyances like that, but overall, like I said, it is a fun show, and if you can stand Chip and Dale, again, as a kid, I came into it not liking Chip and Dale that much. I ended up enjoying the show when I was a kid, so... take that for what it's worth. It is an enjoyable show. If you're looking for something to watch on Disney+, that's a pretty good place to start, as with all the Disney afternoon shows. Now, if you notice the shirt I'm wearing, this is a shirt that was almost made for me. You'll see, everything I need to know I learned by watching 80s cartoons. If you look at the specified texts and logos on this thing, you can see He-Man represented, Thundercats, Transformers, Ninja Turtles. I've talked about all of those. But right here, you can see G.I. Joe represented on the shirt, and it's like, oh my god, on this channel, I don't think I've ever talked about G.I. Joe, which was also one of my favorite things from my childhood. So I decided to watch a bunch of G.I. Joe, because I haven't revisited it in a long time. So I started off by watching the first two miniseries that kicked off the original animated series that I watched when I was younger. G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, also known by fans as the Mass Device, since the Mass Device is like the MacGuffin and the driving force of the entire story. And G.I. Joe 2, The Revenge of Cobra. These two 5-part miniseries were the prelude to what ultimately became the animated series for G.I. Joe, and eventually led to the creation of Season 1. And the 5-part miniseries was fairly common for this show. Like I said, they did the 2 before the series even started properly. And when the series finally kicked off, they started off with the 5-part miniseries, The Pyramid of Darkness. And then when Season 2 started up, they did Arise, Serpentor, Arise. Which is probably, I have a friend who's also into a bunch of this 80s cartoon stuff, and Rise Serpentor Rise was his favorite one of the G.I. Joe miniseries. And even G.I. Joe the movie, more on that later, was turned into a 5-part miniseries on TV, as most of the 80s cartoon movies were, which I'll get into that in a little bit. But the 5-part miniseries was fairly common in G.I. Joe, the animated show, based off of the Hasbro toy line, and made by Sunbow and Marvel, the same people that made the Transformers animated series, and the corresponding comic book series, which was released by Marvel. So you had both of those going on concurrently, and G.I. Joe is an interesting one where, He-Man had some comics, and Thundercats had some comics, and DuckTales, its entire foundation is on the Carl Barks comics. Transformers had a Marvel Comics run, and generally, I preferred the TV show over the comics. Uncle Scrooge might be an exception. The Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge comics are fantastic, and I think I preferred that over the DuckTales show, but I love the DuckTales show, so it's almost a flip a coin, take your pick. But G.I. Joe is the one case where I can say that I definitively loved the comics more than I did the animated series. I think the comics run done by Larry Hama was a lot more grounded and felt a lot more believable in its presentation of like military operations, and it felt a little bit more realistic and a little bit more authentic, whereas G.I. Joe, the cartoon show, lent itself more to more fantastic elements like horror and science fiction and various other things, and embraced the more cartooniness of it and kind of the silliness of the toy line. Because a lot of those characters look ridiculous in the toy line, and translating them to print in comic form or in animation is kind of difficult. Both mediums found their ways to do it, and but like I said, the cartoon show embraced a more like silly, over-the-top aspects of it. Not so much in the first miniseries, Real American Hero, which we're going to start with that. Real American Hero, which was the first 5-parter to kick off the animated universe of G.I. Joe, this was before a lot of key characters were introduced in the toy line or the comics even. There's no Flint, there's no Lady J, there's no Roadblock, there's no Shipwreck, there's no, the Dreadnoks aren't here yet, Dr. Mindbender, Zaymot and Tomax, a lot of characters were not introduced yet, so the first miniseries is a lot more basic, and I kind of like it for that, where it's like, hey, before everything got really, really crazy, we kind of have this more basic, and this is, the first miniseries does feel a little bit more grounded than most of the rest of the show does, although it does lend itself to some silliness with like mind control and Cobra Commander and Destro playing video games with their mind-controlled servants and things like that, but it's... but I think the simpler approach helps it kind of stand out a little bit and let them build a foundation for what would eventually become the TV show. The main Joes in this one, and that's the other thing about G.I. Joe, Transformers as well, but the casts for these shows got insanely huge as the toy line just grew and grew and grew, and they put more and more characters into it. It felt like more and more characters came on board, and almost too many to keep track of. But I guess it kind of makes sense in a show about military, because that's ultimately what the toys were and what the show was. It's kind of the ultimate playing with army men, like, the old cliche of the boys that play with the little army men toys. This is like the ultimate version of that, is what the G.I. Joe toy line was. And the G.I. Joe toy line, the vehicles were really cool. The figures were of a much smaller variety than, say, He-Man or Ninja Turtles, but the vehicles were really the main selling point of the toy line. They were just really, really cool. But yeah, like I said, the cast for these shows got insanely huge, especially when you look into Season 2 and even the Deke series, which I didn't even bother going into that, but... It's there's a lot of G.I. Joe characters, so it's kind of like this weird situation where the cream kind of has to rise to the top, where you at least have to have like a solid core of like main characters to really focus on. I think in the animated show it started off as Duke and Scarlet, with Snake Eyes and Stalker as kind of the next step down. Snake Eyes, unfortunately, who was the best character in the comics by far, never really found his footing in the animated series. It was I think the miniseries Real American Hero. It probably represents Snake Eyes at his best. It was before he was a ninja. He was more of a masked commando. At this point, the ninja thing kind of came out later. But even later on in the animated series, when they changed him into more of a ninja and they reflected that aspect of his personality, like the feud with Storm Shadow wasn't really there. They gave that to, I'll cover that in a little bit when I talk about Revenge of Cobra. But Snake Eyes just didn't really find his footing. And to my understanding, it's because he didn't talk, and the animation writers just had a difficult time like narrowing down a personality for somebody that doesn't talk. But the comics did it. I mean, the comics did a great job of it. The best G.I. Joe comic was Silent Interlude. That's the most famous one, and it's just Snake Eyes on a mission with no dialogue, and it's fantastic. Also, he's a fucking ninja. I mean, that's awesome. In a military. That's amazing. And, but anyways, the main Joes at this point, it's really Duke, Scarlet, Stalker, and Snake Eyes. Stalker would almost disappear entirely after this. He would pretty much get replaced by Roadblock, because it's like, can't you have two black guys? It's okay to have two black guys, I'm just saying. But Roadblock kind of took Stalker's place. But again, Stalker played a much bigger role in the comics and was really good in the comics, whereas Roadblock didn't really seem to do all that much in the comics. So it's really weird to contrast and compare, like, who got over or who became like the darlings in both the comics and the cartoon show. But here, it's before a lot of the really main Joes really show up, the ones that would kind of dominate season 1. And on the Cobra side of things, and this is where I'm going to be a little contrarian here, or at least when I was a kid, it's when I was a little contrarian. I actually liked Cobra way more than the Joes. And again, I liked the Joes. There were Joes that I liked, like Snake Eyes. Even in his limited capacity in the animated series, I liked Snake Eyes a lot. I liked Spirit. I liked Scarlet and Lady J. I liked Flint. Well, Duke and Flint were kind of interchangeable, but I liked them anyway. I liked Shipwreck. I liked Gung Ho. I liked Roadblock. I liked those guys. But there were so many characters on the G.I. Joe side of things that it kind of, you lost track of who to really focus on. With Cobra, that was less of a problem because there were far less characters on the Cobra side of things. And in this miniseries, it's really just Cobra Commander, Destro, the Baroness, who isn't fully realized yet. She's not in her black jumpsuit yet. She's in a blue jumpsuit with green sunglasses. It looks really weird. But it's really Cobra Commander, the Baroness, Destro, and Major Blood, who's really just more of a mercenary and doesn't really play that big of a role. So the Cobra side of things is a lot smaller, and I think the relationships in the Cobra camp are a lot easier to kind of get invested in because there's fewer of them, and because there's fewer of them, you get more interactions between those specific characters. Like Cobra Commander and Destro, it's one of the key relationships in the animated series, because they're constantly butting heads with each other and they bicker like an old married couple. Destro and Baroness have a romantic relationship with each other, and that develops over the course of the series. And there are other things that develop as more characters are added, but the Cobra cast never felt like it got so big that it was unwielding. As opposed to the Joes, where you had to, like, okay, who's the main Joe? Is it Duke or Flint? And they kind of switch places, you know. There was no Optimus Prime. That was kind of like Transformers had Optimus Prime to be, like, the centerpiece of the Autobots, to be the guiding light. And Duke or Flint never really reached that role. And in Season 2, they introduced General Hawk, and he didn't quite reach that level either. But for me, it was just easier to invest in the Cobras because they were just there were fewer of them, so they were definitely more memorable with them. And that's one thing that G.I. Joe had going for it, was the terrific voice acting, because a lot of these characters had very distinct voices. When you listen to some of the more higher up authority characters in G.I. Joe, like Duke, great voice. And you listen to General Hawk in Season 2 and Flint, terrific voices. Actually, I didn't mention this when I talked about Tailspin, but the voice of Baloo was Ed Gilbert. And Ed Gilbert was also the voice of Colonel Hawk. General Hawk, I'm sorry. And completely different characters on opposite ends of the spectrum. General Hawk, strict, authoritarian, sounds like America. And Baloo the Bear is this lazy asshole that flies a plane. But he played both characters very, very well, and it's just a testament to how good he was as a voice actor. So I just wanted to call that out and make sure that he gets the credit he deserves. He was also Blitzwing on G.I. Joe, or on Transformers, sorry. But the voice acting in G.I. Joe, the Sunbow series, is very, very good and very distinct. And of course, the ones that everybody remembers are the voice of Cobra Commander and Destro. Chris Latta and his terrific voice for Cobra Commander, which at this early stage they emphasized the hissing a lot more, where he would really emphasize like the S's very strongly because they wanted him to sound snake-like. That kind of got dropped as the series progressed, and they just kind of let him screech and scream like Starscream, because he uses basically the same voice, and but it comes across as great. And Destro is Arthur Burghardt doing the voice, who I heard as a voice actor, he was also the voice of Pete in the Mickey Mouse cartoon The Prince and the Pauper, so which I highly recommend checking out, by the way. I think that's a forgotten gem. I believe it's on Disney Plus. Maybe I'll watch that next week. Who knows? But the voice acting in this is great, and I love the Cobra characters. And the first miniseries really benefits from kind of being simpler and having a smaller cast to work with, and I think that makes it a lot easier to digest. Now, what this miniseries also did was kind of set the tone for all the other 5-part miniseries that the show did, because they're all virtually the same, where Cobra invents some sort of weapon that causes problems and that could destroy the world. And in this case, in this special, it's the mass device, which is a device that lets them transport anything they want, anywhere they want. So if they want to transport Cobra troopers into the G.I. Joe base, they can do that. If they want to steal the Eiffel Tower, which they do, they can do that. And G.I. Joe has to stop them. And it also turns out that the mass device is powered by 3 essential elements. And it's like a meteorite fragment, hard water, or deep water from this very specific location in the ocean. And I forget what the other one was, but it's these weird like things that would never come up in any conversation, and that lends itself more to like the more sci-fi elements. And there's an underwater battle where they fight worm monsters and all this other stuff, and they also had fun with it, like whenever they went to different places. And in Revenge of Cobra, for example, I know that there's like they go to the North Pole, but they don't want to call it the North Pole; they call it the roof of the world. And Roadblock winds up trapped in the Pit of Chaos. And there's a lot of like great names like that they use for these locations. But anyway, all of the 5-part miniseries ultimately amount to globetrotting, trying to stop Cobra from collecting the elements to work the mass device. And G.I. Joe wants to build their own mass device, so they have to collect the elements as well. And you see that pattern repeat in all of the miniseries. In Revenge of Cobra, it's the pieces of the Weather Dominator, Destro's Weather Dominator, which can control the weather, and it gets broken into 3 pieces, and now all the members of Cobra and G.I. Joe are rushing to get it. And this is actually in the first miniseries. This is where Snake Eyes arguably gets his best moment in the entire animated continuity, where he gets irradiated trying to save the other Joes and get to the and get one of the elements, but he winds up meeting his pet wolf Timber, because back then in G.I. Joe, like a lot of the Joes had pets that pet sidekicks that they hung around with. Shipwreck had Polly the parrot, and Mutt had Junkyard the dog, which actually led to one of my favorite episodes of the original series, but I didn't rewatch that. But and Snake Eyes, the silent ninja commando guy, had a pet wolf named Timber, and Timber's kind of like the original G.I. Joe pet, so he's got a special place in my heart for the silliness of like that military people would need animal pets on the field with them. It's fun in how goofy it is. But they introduced Timber, and Snake Eyes is healed by a blind man, a blind hermit living in the middle of nowhere, and it's the closest we ever get to the Snake Eyes of the comics, who's kind of like this silent warrior that has the weight of the world on his shoulder, and I really like that stuff. So, and of course, the romance with Scarlet is way underplayed. In the comics, it becomes more of a thing, like the romantic element between Scarlet and Snake Eyes. In the show, it's more between Scarlet and Duke. Which actually, when I get into G.I. Joe Resolute, they kind of work both of them in briefly, and reference both of them. But in any case, the Mass Device miniseries serves as a great introduction for G.I. Joe the series, for the concepts, some of the key characters, even though many of them weren't there yet, and it was still like a work in progress. But it really created the formula for what would make the G.I. Joe animated series a success. And like I said, it would also paint the... it would also provide the formula for all the other 5-part miniseries. Because I talked about Revenge of Cobra with the Weather Dominator. In Pyramid of Darkness, it was the cubes that generated the Pyramid of Darkness, which was a energy field that Cobra Commander created that could black out the world and basically nullify electricity. It's basically a giant like EMP, and they have to get the cubes or stop the cubes to destroy the Pyramid of Darkness. And then in Arise Serpentor Arise, which is probably the nuttiest one, they're all grave robbers. So Cobra has decided to become a bunch of grave robbers where they're combing the tombs of Earth's greatest leaders for DNA to build their own super soldier emperor in Serpentor. And I have my own personal feelings about Serpentor, but and I'll talk about it more when I talk about G.I. Joe the movie, but basically all the 5-part miniseries are virtually the same to some degree. It just depends on like what characters are being introduced and what tone they're going for that kind of separates them from all the other ones. And I guess this will lead me into Revenge of Cobra, which was the second miniseries. And the cast of characters has grown considerably this time around. The biggest additions are probably on the G.I. Joe side of things. I mean, all the ones that were in Real American Hero are still... Well, Stalker, I think, was gone by this point. But Duke and Snake Eyes are still there. Scarlet's still there. Gung Ho is still there. But the biggest additions are Flint and Lady J, who would basically become the new Duke and Scarlet, would become kind of the main Joes, and who would actually, in a weird crossover with Transformers, Flint and Lady J would have a daughter that would become an ally of the Autobots in the future. So in the post-movie episodes that take place in the future, Flint and Lady J's daughter is an ally of the Autobots, which is kind of interesting, a nice little connection between the two shows. And Flint, who's got definitely the best voice out of all the Joes. His voice is absolutely terrific. I love it. You've got Roadblock, who rhymes all the time for some reason. It's the 80s. Everybody had to have a weird speech pattern. And Shipwreck, who actually joins the G.I. Joes in this special. He's not... Most of the time when a G.I. Joe member is introduced, they're introduced as being always having been there. But in Shipwreck's case, he actually becomes a G.I. Joe in this miniseries, which is kind of neat. And he's like this weird Jack Nicholson sailor type that ended up being a really fun character for the show. And on the Cobra side of things, the biggest additions are Storm Shadow, who is their own ninja, and probably the single most competent member of the Cobra organization in the TV show. Like I said, though, his feud with Snake Eyes is not present in the cartoon show. Instead, they gave it to Spirit, who's the Native American guy that, for G.I. Joe, and he has a pet eagle. He is an eagle sidekick named Freedom, which might be the most American thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. The Native American guy has a pet eagle named Freedom. That is just... God, that's the most 4th of July thing I've ever heard in my life. But anyway, the feud is more between Spirit and Storm Shadow instead of Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, which seems a little wrong in hindsight, but again, like, the comics and the cartoons weren't really reflecting each other. There's an interesting contrast there. What they picked and who they picked to do to fill what role that they were going for. But also on the Cobra side of things, we were introduced to Zartan and the Dreadnoks, who are an independent mercenary group that Cobra hires for various missions and functions, and they are driven by money. That is their main motivating factor. So even though they work with Cobra quite extensively, they are their own group. And Zartan is the leader. Of course, Zartan had this weakness where he has camouflage powers and almost like a chameleon, but it quite pointlessly, his powers are undone when he's exposed to sunlight, which to me is like, if you can't camouflage yourself in the sunlight, then what's the point of having camouflage powers? That weakness was done away with pretty quickly. It didn't come up very often after this special, but I think Zartan and the Dreadnoks add a very different element to the show, more of a like a crime element in a way, where it's like, oh, these are just thugs and crooks, highly skilled thugs and crooks, but they're not military guys. And it's fun that Cobra Commander would actually like recruit these guys to perform several functions. And Zartan even betrays Cobra at one point because it's like he sees an opportunity to steal a part of the Weather Dominator and use it as in a way to kind of play Cobra and G.I. Joe against each other. And it's really really interesting. I think the Dreadnoks added a very different element to the show and were typically a lot of fun, even though it felt like they hang around Cobra a little too much. They work for Cobra a little too closely, where it's like, dude, you're paid mercenaries. You're supposed to do whatever you want. Why are you taking orders? Like, later in the show, it's like they take orders from Serpentor. Like, why are they taking orders from Serpentor? Doesn't he pay them to, like, do, random gopher shit? I don't know. But in any case, I think the Dreadnoks add a lot to Revenge of Cobra, and a lot of the new characters do. Like, the Revenge of Cobra is a lot more colorful than the first one. Again, large part of that is because of all the new characters they introduce, and they lean a little bit more into the silliness this time around, and Pyramid of Darkness gets even sillier than that. I wish I had rewatched that one, but I didn't have time. But if you want to get a taste of what the G.I. Joe animated series was all about, I highly recommend checking out any of the 5-part miniseries, honestly. I think they're pretty good indicators of what made the G.I. Joe cartoon so great, and what made it so much fun, and what made it so entertaining. And keeping up with the trend of G.I. Joe, I also rewatched G.I. Joe the movie earlier this week, because of course, every 80s cartoon that was a hit had to get a movie of some kind. And a little backstory before talking about the movie. The movie itself kind of serves as a series finale to the Sunbow series. Then G.I. Joe continued with the Deke series and actually picked up with the same continuity and continued along. I was never a huge fan of the Deke series, although it did do one thing that I kind of liked, which I'll touch up on in a second. But G.I. Joe was an interesting case where I really liked the 2 miniseries that opened up the show. I really liked Season 1, but Season 2 was the first example in my life where a show jumped the shark for me. And I became less interested in the show. And the reason for that is because they introduced Serpentor in the aforementioned 5-part miniseries, Arise, Serpentor, Arise. Now, my biggest issue here is that Serpentor took over and became the Emperor of Cobra, whatever the fuck that means, and became the new big villain, taking Cobra Commander's place. Cobra Commander got demoted. And my biggest problem with that whole setup, well, one, Cobra Commander is my favorite character in all of G.I. Joe. Snake Eyes too, but Snake Eyes, it's more in the comics. In all G.I. Joe media, whether it be cartoon, comics, movies, whatever, Cobra Commander is almost always my favorite character. It's just how it works out. I love the guy. I love the mystery surrounding him. In the animated series, I think he's hilarious. And I just love watching him. It's like putting Daffy Duck in charge of a world military. I think he's a hoot. And when you replace him with Serpentor, it's like, okay, so maybe Serpentor is more of a threat, and it's like, okay, oh, you dealt with this goofball, Cobra Commander, now you gotta deal with Serpentor, and he's not gonna be easy. And then you watch the show, and Serpentor feels like a reject from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and the outfit that he wears is completely ridiculous. And, you watch the show and he loses to G.I. Joe 5 times a week like Cobra Commander did. So what's the difference? Like, at least let me have the funny guy. If he's going to lose all the time, at least let me have the funny guy. And I just hated Serpentor so much that I became less interested in G.I. Joe. And the movie picks up with Season 2. Serpentor is fully in charge. Like I said, he was created by the Emperor, or the members of Cobra High Command, who were sick and tired of Cobra Commander, scouring the tombs of the world's greatest leaders, like Attila the Hun, like Vlad Tepes, Count Dracula. I'll reference who I'm referencing. I'll talk about who I'm referencing there in a minute. But like Confucius, I think was one of them. I think like Caesar or something like that. They just comb the tombs of all these historical leaders to get DNA to create a super soldier in Serpentor to be the new emperor. And that was the basis for Season 2, with Serpentor in charge of Cobra now. And they introduced a bunch of new Joes in Season 2 that kind of took over. Sergeant Slaughter got introduced in Arise, Serpentor, Arise. And I gotta be honest, Sergeant Slaughter, I actually appreciate him more for his work on G.I. Joe than I do wrestling. Because G.I. Joe was the first thing I saw him in. I saw him in G.I. Joe before I saw him in wrestling. And so I think of him as like a G.I. Joe guy. And he's great because he's strong as hell and he beats the hell out of everybody and he cuts promos on him while he's doing it. He's fantastic. I love Sarge. More on Sarge in a bit. But that leads us into the movie, and that's where we are with Season 2 with Cobra Commander basically becoming like Starscream, where he's trying to take over Cobra from Serpentor. And that would pay off in the Deke series, where Cobra Commander would come back and ultimately take Cobra back from Serpentor, which is the one thing that the Deke series did that I love. It was like, okay, that's pretty cool that they did that. They humiliated Serpentor on his way out. Like, no dignity at all whatsoever. It's almost like, okay, they knew that Serpentor was garbage, just like I did. So, that leads us to the movie, where Serpentor is fully in charge of Cobra at this point, and Serpentor is confronted by a mysterious woman named Pythona, who is as we discover, is part of a grand, secret, ancient organization, a snake cult that has been secretly backing the Cobra organization the entire time without anybody knowing. Turns out that this snake cult, known as Cobra La, a name that is supposedly, and I've heard conflicting things on this, supposedly was not intended to be the final name. It was like a shorthand for Cobra Later. So Cobra La was shorthand for Cobra Later. It's like, look, we don't know what the name is yet, but we'll come up with it later. But apparently, from what I've heard, Hasbro liked the name and just stuck with it. And it's like, nope, we're making toys. Go forth and conquer. It's Cobra La now. And I think some people reason that it sounds a little bit like Shangri-La. The name's still silly, and their battle cry is even sillier. Go watch the movie for the battle cry. But anyway, as we discover, this snake cult known as Cobra La had backed the Cobra organization, and Cobra Commander, as we discover in this movie, we finally discover his origin, is a native from this snake cult that was deformed in a science accident, an unfortunate science accident, and he was sent forth by himself to go raise an army and conquer the world, and then hand the keys of the world over to the snake cult. And when they realized that Cobra Commander was a failure, they implanted the idea to create Serpentor in Dr. Mindbender, who was the Cobra scientist that thought he came up with the idea to create Serpentor, when really it was an idea that was implanted in him by the members of Cobra La, and which they explain in this movie. And that's the basis for the movie, really, because now this snake cult has seen their opportunity to take back the world, because they have and I should note that they have like an alien organic technology, kind of like the Guyver, if you've ever seen that movie, or read I believe that movie was based on a manga or something, but it's kind of like this bio-organic technology, and they completely reject, the inorganic technology that Homo sapiens have, and they see them as an abomination. I kind of liken it to the Yuuzhan Vong from the Star Wars New Jedi Order series, and that whole war that took place in the expanded universe. And they see their opportunity to take over the world when the G.I. Joes create the BET, the Broadcast Energy Transmitter, which is a device that generates a shit ton of energy just by flipping an on and on switch. And by doing that, they realize that they can use the BET to launch all these mutative spores into outer space. And the energy from the BET will ripen the spores and allow them to come showering down on the Earth, and it'll mutate every human on planet Earth into a useless and weak creature. Then that pretty much gives them carte blanche to just completely march over the world and take over. Serpentor goes along with this plan, and we meet the members of Cobra La. I already mentioned Pythona. There's also Nemesis Enforcer, who is the silent thug with bat wings. So he's like this giant 8-foot-tall dude with bat wings, which makes him a natural to fight Sergeant Slaughter in the film's climax. One of the best moments in the movie. But again, I'll get to Sergeant a little bit when I talk about the Joes. And we also meet the leader of the snake called Globulus, who is voiced by the one and only Burgess Meredith, one of my favorite actors of all time. He was in Of Mice and Men. He was in probably my favorite episode of The Twilight Zone. And more notably, he was the Penguin from the Adam West Batman. And my favorite role he ever had, he was Mickey from the Rocky movies. So to hear Burgess Meredith's voice coming out of Globulus is fantastic. He's great. A couple of his line reads are a little off. I don't know if this was a sign of him getting older. Like, there's one line where he says to Lieutenant Falcon, "I will stain my hands with your blood," which is a great line. But the way he reads it, it's like he combined them all into one word. "I will stain my hands with your blood." And it sounded really weird how he said it. But generally, his performance is very cool, and it's great to hear that voice. When I met Sarge at AwesomeCon last year, he mentioned the recording, because I brought up this movie to him. I was like, "Dude, we all say that you're the best part of the movie." And and when he was talking about Burgess Meredith, he actually did his recordings with Don Johnson and Burgess Meredith. And he's like, "Yeah, Burgess Meredith kept forgetting his lines. He was so, and maybe it was a sign of Burgess Meredith getting older, that he just wasn't as sharp as he used to be. But it's still great to hear his voice in this." And I mean, I'm never going to object to Burgess Meredith being in anything. He was great in what were those movies? Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men? He was great in those, too. So, look at the outtake reel for Grumpier Old Men. He's fantastic. He's so good. I love Burgess. I love him so much. But anyway, that's like the main conflict of the film. And the Joes are kind of confronted with this new enemy that they had no idea about, had no concept of, and don't understand at all whatsoever. But they have to save the world and protect the BET and keep Cobra Law from getting their hands on it. And we get so a lot of the classic Joes are here. It's actually the largest cast of G.I. Joe characters ever assembled for a single project. If you look at any individual episode or any of the miniseries, they get almost every Joe into the film at some point, even if it is mostly small roles, because very much like Transformers the movie, they want to introduce new characters and new toys to take over for the old ones. So a lot of the old characters, instead of getting killed off, they kind of get bitched out. Snake Eyes gets the worst of it, where he literally gets bitch slapped at one point in the movie and is of absolutely no consequence to the film. Lady J is barely in it. Shipwreck is barely in it. Flint is barely in it, and Flint doesn't even like lose a fight or anything. He just goes off and as a search party and then disappears until the end of the movie. Duke plays a significant role because it turns out he is the half-brother to the main character of the story, which I'll get into that in a little bit. But Roadblock plays a big role as he goes on a little road trip with Cobra Commander. More on that in a bit. And but largely it's focusing on the new characters. They introduce the Rawhides, who are like the new G.I. Joe recruits. The lead, the main character of that group is Lieutenant Falcon, who is voiced by Miami Vice's Don Johnson, and is in the words of Beachhead, by the way, Beachhead, one of my favorite Joes, the most underrated Joe, and the sequence where he's training the Rawhides is one of the best scenes in the movie. I love Beachhead so much. "Where's that gold-plated goof-off, Lieutenant Falcon?" And the reason earlier when I talked about Arise Serpentor Arise, I mentioned Count Dracula, Vlad Tippy. Beachhead was the one that read that line, and a friend of mine, we talk about G.I. Joe all the time. And we're like, dude, Beachhead was one of the greatest Joes, and we love his voice. He's just fantastic. Everything he says, "I hope you both get fleas." Beachhead is one of my top 10 favorite Joes. Does not get nearly enough love. In the animated show, I think he's one of the best Joes. Not so much in the comics, but in the animated show, he's one of the absolute best Joes. And like almost every line he says in this movie is hysterical. So anyway. Falcon is an idiot. It's through his own screw-up that Serpentor escapes captivity from the Joes. And he's put on court-martial, or he's in a preliminary hearing to be put up for court-martial, but it's ultimately decided to send him to Sergeant Slaughter to whip him into shape. And that's where we get to see Sarge for the first time in the movie, and Sarge is absolutely amazing in this. Sarge is the best character in the movie. He is absolutely great. His line reads are great. His dialogue is great. There are only two ways out of my command: on your feet like a man, or in a ditty bag, an itty bitty ditty bag. And he's got his own group of screw-ups that he's training. And apparently, Slaughter's renegades are based on professional wrestlers. They're actually based on professional wrestlers. Red Dog is based on Jimmy Snuka. Taurus is based on the Iron Sheik. And I think he's like a mix between the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. And Mercer is based on the Dynamite Kid. And Mercer is actually the most interesting of the new characters that they do nothing with. He was actually an ex-Cobra Viper, and I'm like, dude, the movie should have been about him and his redemption. That would have been way better than Lieutenant Falcon, who's kind of an asshole. Like, he's such an unlikable asshole from the word go. And I get it, like, there's a character arc where he becomes a good Joe by the end of the movie, and there's that emotional resonance, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that gives him a little extra motivation to be a better Joe. But he's so unlikable early on. So before you get to the change, it's like, oh man, what a dick. I'd put him up for court-martial. Fuck that guy. But anyway, and that's this is where we get into like the interesting aspect of who the protagonist of this movie is. On the surface, it seems like Lieutenant Falcon. But I would argue that there's kind of a dual protagonist thing going on in the film where this movie feels like it kind of belongs to Cobra Commander, where it's kind of his story, where the movie should probably be retitled The Passion of Cobra Commander, because he gets abused the entire movie. Like, from the word go, the opening scene opens with the Cobra High Command in the Terrordrome, and they are all just shitting on him. And then he takes them to Cobra Law as part of like an escape plan, and knowing that, thinking that there's safe refuge in Cobra Law, and then Cobra Law is like, no, you failed us. We're gonna put you on trial because we hate you. And Nemesis Enforcer slaps him, and Globulus threatens him, and he's put on trial, which is where we get the explanation for his whole origin and everything. And then it ends with him being exposed to the mutation spores that they're going to use to take over the world. And throughout the movie, Cobra Commander slowly degenerates into a snake. And there's a famous line among G.I. Joe fans, "I was once a man." Sounds like Gollum, quite honestly. But he just carries on and on, because his mind is degenerating as well as his body. And he's like a shell of his former self. He was the big bad of G.I. Joe when this show started. And I would argue, in a lot of ways, like the main character of the show, because he is in way more episodes of the animated series. In a show with a large cast where characters are being switched out all the time. He is in, like, I think 80 episodes out of 95, compared to everybody else who's, like, nowhere close to that. And so it really feels like he's the main character of the entire series. And his path kind of mirrors Lieutenant Falcon, where their respective groups hate them and are just talking down to them and abuse them. They're both put on trial at one point, and they're both punished, and then Falcon is given a path of redemption, whereas Cobra Commander gets kicked even lower, where he ultimately, as the Joes are trying to escape Cobra Law, he ultimately sides with Roadblock and offers to help Roadblock escape to help the Joes, because Cobra Commander, at the end of the day, he wants to save his own skin. It's like, dude, I have a better chance of survival with this G.I. Joe guy than I do with literally anything else I do at this point. So Roadblock and Cobra Commander go on their little road trip, which I wish they had focused on that more, because there is a interesting part where Roadblock gets blinded, and Cobra Commander knows the way out of Cobra Law because he lived there, so they kind of need each other to get out safely. And it's like, man, they probably could have made an entire movie just about that, but yeah, and it all ties into the end of the movie where Cobra Commander and Lieutenant Falcon's paths finally cross in the climax, and Cobra Commander, as a snake, gets a small measure of revenge against Serpentor and against Cobra Law that helps Falcon and the G.I. Joes win the day at the end. So it's like, the entire show begins with Cobra Commander trying to take over the world, and he just keeps failing and failing and failing. Then he gets Cobra taken away from him, and he gets demoted when Serpentor comes in. Then his own people put him on trial, humiliate him, and degenerate him into a snake. And he is brought down to his absolute lowest point. And then at the tail end of the movie, which is the climax and the finale to the Sunbow series, he finally gets a win. A small win, but he finally gets a small win that helps save the world as well in the process. So it's almost like the entire show was building up to that moment. And to do that, they had to drag Cobra Commander down to his absolute lowest moment to get to that point. So, And also, I mean, the climax is great because we get to see Sergeant Slaughter battle Nemesis Enforcer, where, again, he beats the shit out of an 8-foot-tall bat guy and cuts a promo on him while he's doing it. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's amazing. So, and there's a lot of fun moments like that sprinkled throughout the film. The Dreadnoks get a fun moment in the middle where they help Serpentor escape. The interplay between Cobra Commander and Serpentor and their little cat and mouse game is a lot of fun to watch. Duke, who is revealed to be Falcon's half-brother, adds a little bit more emotional resonance to the film. We actually get to a point where Duke gets stabbed in the chest by Serpentor, and that provides Falcon with the motivation to become a better Joe and to stop Serpentor at the end of the movie. And originally, there's an interesting story behind this where originally Duke was supposed to die in this film. Production on the G.I. Joe movie began before Transformers the movie and before My Little Pony the movie, although My Little Pony is like a non-factor in this discussion. I guess it has a little bit of a play, which I'll talk about here. And as Sunbow was developing the Transformers movie as well, they was like, oh great, we should kill Optimus Prime too, because that's a great idea. The toys are being discontinued anyway, so we can kill him and add a lot more emotional resonance to the story. And actually kill somebody in our military shows, in our war shows, because G.I. Joe is a military show, Transformers is a war show, and it's like nobody dies in this thing. It's like, well, now we get to do it. And so they adopted the idea to kill Optimus Prime. But the production schedules got wacky, and somehow G.I. Joe the movie got pushed to the end of the production line, behind Transformers the movie and behind My Little Pony the movie. And neither of those two movies yielded strong financial success at the box office. And so because of that, G.I. Joe got released straight to TV and without a theatrical release. But also, because there was such a negative backlash to the death of Optimus Prime, it was decided not to kill Duke. So it's really funny. If G.I. Joe the movie had come out first, a lot of people have speculated, like it was originally supposed to, a lot of people have speculated that Optimus Prime might have survived the movie if had G.I. Joe the movie been finished first like it was supposed to be. I don't think so, because I don't think Duke had the emotional resonance that... I wasn't as emotionally attached to Duke as I was Optimus Prime. Because like I said, Flint and Duke were really interchangeable, and you also had General Hawk, who was an authority figure at top. So it's like, I mean, I like Duke, but he wasn't like the be-all, end-all like Optimus Prime was. That was a completely different level of heartbreak. So I don't know if it would have had the same impact. I don't know. But because of what happened with Optimus Prime, said, okay, let's not kill Duke, and they added it. They poorly added in a line from Scarlet where she says, he's gone into a coma. And then at the end of the movie, they add in a line, it's like, Duke's gonna be A-okay! Yo, Joe! And it's like, oh my god. Oh man, they really don't want to piss off the parents here. But it still kind of works in giving Falcon that motivation to be a better Joe and stop being an asshole. So there is that benefit to it, I guess. It's just funny how things would have played out. Now, I've heard that a funeral sequence for Duke was animated, which I would love to see that footage. I doubt it exists anymore, but it would be interesting to see that. If that's true at all, I don't know. But in any case, G.I. Joe the movie, my overall thoughts on it, I did not like it that much as a kid. And the main reason I didn't like it, and this is going to sound weird for me because I love monsters and sci-fi shit, the introduction of Cobra Law with these bioorganic like creatures and things like a bat guy like in Nemesis Enforcer, and they ride around on these worm monsters, and Roadblock has a great line where he says, ugh, even their Air Force is ugly, and great line, and that was just weird to me. Like, it was just, I couldn't accept it because I thought of G.I. Joe as being more grounded and more based in military, and you throw this whole thing on top of it with this snake cult, it's like, what the fuck is this? And actually, in the comics, Cobra Law never appears in the Marvel comics, the original run with Larry Hama. And Larry Hama has said in interviews, he was like, yeah, I drew the line at Cobra Law. It's like, look, I will put most wacky characters. I will listen to Hasbro and listen to whatever wacky characters they want to put in this thing. I am not, under any circumstances, putting Cobra Law anywhere near my project. It's not touching this. I'm not doing it. He drew the line at Cobra Law. I mean, you look at some of the wacky characters that did show up in the comics, it's like, yeah, Cobra Law was too much for him, but Zanzibar, who was probably the weirdest of the Dreadnoks, that was okay. Raptor was pretty cool. I don't want to bash him. Raptor was actually pretty cool, but it is funny when you consider all the weird characters in G.I. Joe that Cobra Law was the one that broke him, where it's like, nope, not doing it. I'm not doing that. But as time has gone on, as I've become an adult and I look back on this movie, I kind of weirdly appreciate how bizarre it is. And again, the TV show, I took everything for granted when I was young, but the TV show had a lot of weird stuff in it. It had an episode where Cobra Commander summoned ghosts to fight G.I. Joe. It had an episode with where Cobra Commander developed the synthoids, so like this cloning technology to help infiltrate G.I. Joe and bring him down from the inside. So there's a lot of weird stuff that went on in the TV show, so maybe Cobra Law is not even the weirdest thing the show ever did. And to build on what I said about Cobra Commander, like, I felt like he was done dirty in this film. Where, like, Cobra Law was like, oh, you screwed up. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you sent him out by himself without any help at all whatsoever. I thought he did pretty well. He built a world military all his own. Of course, the flip side of that is, if Cobra Commander had actually conquered the world and succeeded, do you think for 1 second he would have turned the keys of the world over to Globulus and Cobra Law? No, first thing he would have done, he would have turned to Destro and said, oh, by the way, there's this ice dome in the Himalayas. We're nuking that. First thing, it's like, why, Cobra Commander? Because I said so, that's why. And first thing he would have done, the minute he got control of the world, he would have nuked that ice dome. But in any case, but maybe Cobra Law did help him at various points, because where did the synthoid technology come from? Where did some of the other things that he developed, like the creeping plant technology? Well, I think Destro developed that. But in any case, it's I kind of accepted the movie for its weirdness and all of its funny. There's so many great characters being showcased here. I've talked about Sarge. I've talked about Beachhead. Cobra Commander gets his brief day in the sun where he gets some kind of a win. He's mutated into a snake by the end of the movie. They don't cure him, but he gets to come back in the Deke show, which, again, like, wasn't the biggest fan of the Deke show, but I loved how they brought Cobra Commander back, because it was so humiliating for Serpentor. It was so great, but I think animation-wise, it's a step up from the TV show. It looks better. Season 2 was rough. That's the other part of it. The animation in Season 2 was really rough, so this feels like a huge step up in the animation department. It very much does feel like the TV show, because they use a lot of the music from the TV show, so it's not quite like Transformers the movie, where everything looks and sounds much bigger than what you would get in the TV show, but that might also be a side effect of being relegated to being in a TV special instead of being released to theater, so who knows. But I deliberately saved this part for last because it's the best thing in the movie, and better than Sergeant Slaughter. It's better than literally anything else in the movie, and that is the intro. Now, the G.I. Joe theme song is a classic. We all know it. It's a classic theme song to the original animated series, but the version that they do as the intro for this movie is one of the coolest goddamn things I have ever seen in my entire life. And if they had just played this thing on a loop 10 times straight, that would probably be better than watching the movie. That's probably the biggest problem with the movie, is that it's not as good as the intro. The intro is better than the movie itself. But the intro is definitely worth checking out. I watch it every 4th of July. It gets me in the mood for Rah Rah America and all that other craziness. But G.I. Joe, the movie's intro, is absolutely amazing, with a rockin', kick-ass version of the G.I. Joe theme song. A little Cobra theme song to go along with it as a counter melody. And the animation in that opening sequence is absolutely phenomenal. And it gets most of the characters in there. Not all of them, but most of them. Serpentor is absent, which I'm okay with. Snake Eyes actually has a cool moment in the intro, which is good to see. And Cobra Commander, of course, is the main focus of large parts of it as well, so that's also good to see. So the battle at the Statue of Liberty, which entails the intro, is absolutely incredible and amazing. I highly recommend checking it out. I will leave a link in the description. It is that great. So, G.I. Joe the movie, final verdict. It's not as good as Transformers the movie, but it's one that I've gained a lot of appreciation for over time. I think it's It's a worthy, like, kind of finale to the Sunbow series. I think it showcases some characters very, very well, namely Sergeant Slaughter, Beachhead, and, Cobra Commander. They put him through the ringer, but... and it largely works for me when it didn't work for me that much as a kid. It's really strange how I've kind of flipped on that. But I think it's a very enjoyable movie. I think it's one that I've grown to have more fondness for over time. And it actually does work as a movie, which isn't necessarily true of a lot of the other 80s cartoons that got animated movies. More on that in a little bit. But in any case, G.I. Joe the movie gets a thumbs up for me, and I highly recommend it. Now let's close out the G.I. Joe talk by talking about G.I. Joe Resolute, a somewhat modern reboot of the G.I. Joe in animated media, and one that I welcomed. I didn't know about it when it came out. I didn't find out about it until years after it had come out, and I watched it, and I was really impressed with it. Not only is the animation really good, and not only is it like a nice return to form for G.I. Joe in the world of animation, but it captures a lot of the aspects that I liked about both the comics and the animated series. It has that kind of globe-trotting feel that the miniseries from the animated show had, the old animated show, because the plot is very similar, where Cobra has a doomsday weapon and Joes have to go all over the world to stop him at various points. It has certain aspects from the comic, like the Snake Eye Storm Shadow feud is a key element of the entire thing, which is great to see. And it also references, it actually combines certain elements of the comics and the cartoons. Like I said, in the comics, the romantic element seemed to be Scarlet and Duke. In the comics, it was Scarlet and Snake Eyes. And there's a reference to kind of a love triangle. They don't go all the way with it, thank God, but it doesn't get too nutty. But they do reference, like, romantic feelings between Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet and Duke, and who she's going to pick and everything like that. So it was nice to see them reference, like, all the different versions of G.I. Joe that we know and love from the 80s. And Cobra Commander is also handled very well here. Probably my favorite version of the character, because he has, like, the over-the-top temper tantrums that he used to have in the cartoon, but he's also got that cold, ruthless side of him that you would see in the comics. So it's a nice middle ground between those two extremes and those two different versions of the character. And wonderfully voiced by Charlie Adler, who's a long-standing voice actor, terrific. And he does a great job here and does a wonderful job bringing Cobra Commander back to life for this thing. And once again, Cobra Commander, my favorite character in the entire thing. We see a bunch of Joes pop up here and there, like Duke and Scarlet go off on their own mission. Snake Eyes goes off on his mission to stop Storm Shadow. We see Roadblock, we see Beachhead, which makes me happy. Flint is there, Tunnel Rat is there. And it's overall like a fun little experiment for G.I. Joe, and to my understanding, it was handled somewhat similarly to Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars cartoon, the 2D one, where it's a bunch of, like, quick animated shorts, and like, I think in this case it was like 5 to 10 minute animated shorts. The entire thing is less than an hour long, so it's not even that long. And again, great animation, great action, and it's a little bit more PG-13, a little bit more, like, salty language, and significantly more violent than the old cartoon ever was. And people die. Like, actually, the thing opens up, basically, with Cobra Commander blowing up Moscow, which is a pretty intense way to start things. And actually, to bring it more into the world of the comics as well, they reference Cobra being set in Springfield, which in the comics was, like, their main headquarters for a while until G.I. Joe invaded Springfield. So I often like to joke that the Springfield that was... that the Simpsons TV series was actually the front for the Cobra organization, which is secretly hiding out in Springfield. But in any case, if you're a G.I. Joe fan, I don't think there are too many versions of G.I. Joe that are better than G.I. Joe Resolute. I highly recommend checking it out. I really enjoyed it. I wish it was a little bit longer than an hour, but as this quick and easy thing, I think it works really well. I think it looks great. It feels right. It feels like G.I. Joe. And it's a perfect kind of, like, updated version of that classic property, which doesn't happen all that often. I feel like for every good reboot, there's, like, 10 shitty ones. So it was nice to get this one at least. And, yeah, I welcome it. It's a really, really good one. moving right along from there, we are covering yet another 80s cartoon that got a movie. And this is one that I've talked about extensively in the past. I actually just did a top 20 episode video on it that's been posted to Vimeo, so I'll leave the links in the description if you have not seen it. But Thundercats Ho! The movie. And this is an interesting one. And I've talked about before how a lot of these 80s cartoons that got movies, those movies became 5-part miniseries. Happened to G.I. Joe, happened to Transformers. Both G.I. Joe and Transformers, their movies work better as movies, I think. Although in the G.I. Joe case, in the 5-part miniseries, you do have a live-action Sergeant Slaughter giving like intros and outros to the different parts. So that's cool to see. But other than that, like... Thundercats Ho! The movie is a lot different from that, where, as far as I know, and based on my research, which I couldn't find a whole lot of information, but the movie was a TV special that aired once or twice, and then after that it was just turned into a miniseries on TV. And it never got a home video release in the States. It did, however, get a VHS release in the UK. I've seen the box art for it. I've talked to people that owned it, but... it never got a release stateside. So, interestingly, I've never actually watched the movie version of this. I've only seen the 5-part miniseries, and as part of this, I tried to find the actual movie version. I could not find it anywhere online. It just couldn't be found. All I could find was the 5-part miniseries, which I already own because I have the whole series on DVD, and the entire series is on Hulu now. Actually, the original Thundercats series and the 2011 series are all on Hulu, so I recommend checking those out if you're interested in more Thundercats material. They also have Thundercats Roar. Don't even bother. Just straight up, don't even bother with it. Doesn't count. It's like, that ain't, I don't know what that is, it ain't Thundercats. But I did rewatch the 5 episodes, so I guess you could say I've watched the movie, but I still haven't watched the movie, which is really strange. But I feel like this Thundercats Ho! It works better as a 5-parter because it's structured very much in a way to have cliffhangers where Lino gets his ass kicked this entire friggin' 5-parter because every episode ends with him about to die. And it's like, yeah, it works better as a 5-parter because you have those constant moments where Lino is left hanging and you have to tune in to see the next episode. And it very much feels like the show. There's nothing about it. There's no step up in animation or music or presentation or anything. Even the intro to the movie, it's just the old intro with the title card, Thundercats Ho! The movie, put over it. That's it. That's the only difference. There's nothing to really indicate anything, any kind of heightened effort about this movie other than it's a 5-part episode. And when I did my top 20 episodes, I had Thundercats Ho! On there as like a runner-up for season 2 because it is one of the more celebrated and more well-remembered aspects of Thundercats. A lot of fans remember this 5-parter mainly because I think for 2 reasons. One, it introduces the new Thundercats, Bengali, Pumaira, and Linkso. Pumaira being the new female Thundercat, and that's literally her only character. And like, she's one character that got handled much better in the 2011 version, I think. And she's actually the main reason I'm pissed off the show got canceled. Bengali, who's the blacksmith and helps fix the Sword of Omens at a later date. And the blind Linkso, who's basically a walking PSA. Blind people are people too, and that's basically his whole shtick. But they get introduced in this movie, and I think it's memorable. It's like, oh, hey, new Thundercats. There are more of them. Here you go. And it also works as kind of a Season 1 reunion party for a lot of the characters, because a lot of the characters come back. Groon the Destroyer comes back. Hammerhand and the Berserkers come back, although I have no idea how Hammerhand is alive, because the last time we saw him was in Spitting Image, where he's clearly a ghost. So I don't know how he's alive, they don't explain it, whatever. Captain Shiner comes back, who's one of the best like one-off villains from Season 1. And Thundercat allies like the Snowman of Hook Mountain, Snow Meow, and Hachiman all make special appearances in this as well. So it's a very large cast of characters all assembled for one movie. So those are really the 2 things that really help it to stand out from the normal episode, because you get so many characters running around. Rotaro is even in it, and his only real significant appearance after Feline. Well, he was in Fond Memories too, but it's... Rotaro was massively underutilized in the series, and it's a shame that we had to wait for a 5-part miniseries where he's sharing the stage with like 19 other guys to get any kind of recognition. But them's the breaks sometime. So I think those are the 2 reasons why people remember it. But there are the writing in this is very haphazard. Like, it is all over the place. Like, there's a part where Lion-O goes to Mum-Ra's pyramid to go find out what happened to the new Thundercats, the new Thunderians, and then I think that's the end of part 3 where he gets trapped in the pyramid. Part 4 opens with him getting out of the trap, and then he's like, I have to go to Fire Rock Mountain to save them. It's like, no one told him where Fire Rock Mountain is. How did he know to go to Fire Rock Mountain? There's a part where Rotaro captures Snarf and is like, my prisoner again. And it's like, you never captured Snarf. You captured Snarfer. Huge disconnect. I already talked about Hammerhand and that huge break in continuity there. There's a lot of things going on. There's also a bit where Mum-Ra's plan is to capture the new Thunderians, have the Berserkers capture them, then the Berserkers give them to the mutants, and then the mutants take them to Captain Shiner, and then Captain Shiner takes them to Fire Rock Mountain, and then Captain Shiner gives them to the mutants. I'm like, what's all with like the hide-and-seek bullshit? Like, what is all this? Is it to throw the Thundercats off the trail? I don't know exactly what's going on here, but it's very messily written. Hachiman gets tricked again by Mum-Ra, which just makes him look like an idiot. It's just... there's also, they introduced the Star of Thundera as like a last-minute, like, Deus Ex Machina wrap-up to the story that makes absolutely no sense. The entire thing is just a mess. But also, we get probably the biggest toy parade that the show ever did. And one of the criticisms of 80s cartoons is like they were made to sell toys, basically. Which doesn't have to be a bad thing as long as you're able to write good stories and engage people without... It can work without just being a toy commercial. I've talked about many of the things I liked about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and many of the things I liked about Thundercats that attracted me to it beyond just the toys. And actually with Thundercats, I hated the toys. Like, I did not like the LJN figures that they released. I had a couple of them. I'm like, nah, I'm good. But I love the show, so, take that for whatever point it makes. But... this was the most egregious. Thundercats typically wasn't that bad about it, just blatantly advertising toys. But almost every character that's in this movie has a toy. So it's like they took the entire toy line and just plastered them up on the screen. Almost. They didn't get everybody in there, but they got a good chunk of them. And then they have new characters, new vehicles that show up out with no real build-up, and they just... just coincidentally, Panther, I've been working on the Hovercat and the Thunderclaw. Like, where did those come from? Groon shows up in the middle, out of absolute nowhere, but Groon has a toy, so you can put him in the Toy Parade movie. And you get the new Thundercats introduced as being kind of like a hook for, again, selling more toys. Although the new Thundercats don't really get the best introduction here because they spend most of the movie as captives. So they're like helpless victims the entire time. I'm like, that's not a great way to introduce your new heroes because they're just in captivity most of the movie, most of the 5-part miniseries, and they hardly ever do anything that would paint them as heroes. So it's like, well, because at the end Lion-O anoints them as Thundercats. I'm like, they haven't really done anything. Like they're just, They've shown some promise in being able to fight, but other than that, they've never really, they've never saved anybody, and they haven't really done anything, and they've been pretty useless the entire movie. And, I don't know, it just seems pointless to make them Thundercats. And it seemed pointless to write them as helpless victims for the entire movie. I thought that was very weird to do that. But, with all the criticizing that I'm doing, it must sound like I hate it, but... the main thing that this 5-part special has going for it, I think, that helps to save it, is that it is very colorful and action-packed, and it is exciting to see all these different characters in all these different situations. And it does get very exciting at some points, like the mutants bring in the Fist Pounder, which is their new, weapon to duel the Thunder Tank, and you get a lot of that going on. The battle on Hook Mountain, which goes on for quite a bit, stretches from Part 2 to Part 4, is... a pretty exciting sequence when it's all looked at together. And then you get this bit at the end where all the characters are converging on Fire Rock Mountain to get towards the final showdown against Mum-Ra, and the Star of Thundera comes into play and everything, which that's a whole other thing. But it is very colorful, it is very exciting, and you even get to see Mamut, who's Mum-Ra's dog. Where the hell is, like, you had a dog? How long have you had a dog? But I remember having the Mamut toy when I was a kid, and I was like, wow, what an ugly mutt. But it's kind of funny that Mum-Ra actually has a dog that he cares about. That's just super funny to me for some reason. But so that's like the one. The Berserkers were kind of new characters, but the biggest new villain to come out of this was Mum-Ra's dog, who would stay around until the end of the show. So there's a lot of like changing of the status quo going on with this, and they even made it look like they killed Mum-Ra at the end, which was, they killed him before in the series, like the Lion-O's Anointment Trials and a couple other examples. But it felt like here there was a lot of change coming with the new Thundercats and the new vehicles, and ultimately in Mum-Ra Lives, the next 5-parter, which I thought was the better of the 2 5-parters, I probably should have watched that instead. They introduced a new set of villains like the Lunatics, and the new Thundercat base, the Tower of Omens, where the new Thundercats stay, and their new vehicle, the Thunderstrike, which is a super cool vehicle, arguably cooler than the Thunder Tank. I love the Thunderstrike, it's great. But Thundercats Ho, heavily flawed, sloppily written, but still weirdly fun in its own, like, exciting way. And it kind of works as a preview of the series. Like, if you want to get an idea of what the series was like, get like a high-level view of what the series was all about, check out Thundercats Ho, and you see, like, all this insanity. And I certainly don't put it up there with the best of Season 1 or the better episodes of the series. Certainly not in the top 20 that I selected for the video. But Thundercats Ho is weirdly entertaining in its own strangeness, even with all its flaws. So I kind of enjoyed it, and I kind of enjoyed it on the rewatch, so there's that. Continuing right along with the 80s cartoon trend, we're going to do another movie, He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword. Now, this picture you're seeing right here, this is the original VHS cover of Secret of the Sword, a movie that I remember fondly from my childhood, and one that we watched so much as kids, my brothers and I. We watched it so much that we broke the tape. But I remember that cover and how much I loved it, because it was He-Man and She-Ra on full display, and the idea of a He-Man movie really excited me. So it was at 3 years old, it was probably my favorite movie. He-Man, Masters of the Universe, it's probably the first thing I ever liked. The first thing I ever became a fan of. So I have a lot of fondness for it, as you can tell from previous videos I've done in my top 20 He-Man episode video. But here we get the introduction of his sister, She-Ra, so it's like a twofer. We get to 2 heroes for the price of 1 in this great movie. And again, I've talked about the whole 5-part miniseries thing. Secret of the Sword suffers from, watching it as an adult. As a kid, I didn't care. Like, as a kid, it was perfect. It was the greatest movie ever made. But watching it now as an adult, there's a huge lack of focus in the plot, where the focus of the plot will change every 10 to 15 minutes. And it's like, what is going on here? Like, Hordak, the leader of the evil Horde, introduces a Death Star level device called the Magna Beam, which he's going to use to destroy the rebellion. And that device is destroyed in 15 minutes, and plays no role in the climax of the film. Skeletor shows up and hijacks the film for 10 minutes, after about an hour in. The rebels have to go to Beast Island, and then Beast Island never comes up again for the rest of the movie. It's a very unfocused movie when you look at it as a movie. But then when you consider, it's just the first 5 episodes of She-Ra edited and spliced together to make a movie. And I don't know which came first, the 5 episodes or the movie, but I can say, it's like, look, this works much better as a 5-part miniseries, because as a movie, it's just all over the place. And the only thing that kind of gives the movie any kind of thread throughout the entire film is the origin of She-Ra. Other than that, it almost feels like 5, if you didn't have that one thread, it would be 5, like, disconnected standalone episodes almost. But this is another case of one where I think it works better as a 5-part miniseries than it does as an actual movie, because it's like, dude, there's no 3-act structure here. There's none at all. It's kind of a mess. But I guess I'll talk about the story. It starts off with Prince Adam being sent on a special mission to Etheria by the sorceress. She says, I have a second sword that's just like yours, and you need to give it to somebody. The ancient powers of Grayskull have finally found this person who's worthy of having the sword, and you have to go give it to that person. And He-Man goes to this world and discovers it's under the rule of the evil Horde, led by Hordak and all of his evil lieutenants, like Shadow Weaver and Leech and Mantenna. Most of the new line of the Masters of the Universe toys. The Horde toys were actually some of the better toys in the line, but instead of putting them in the He-Man series, they decided to use them as the antagonists of the She-Ra series because the She-Ra toy line had almost no villains. It had Catra and I think one other one, Entrapta, and that was it. So it's like they didn't have a whole lot to play with on the villain side of things. So they're like, okay, let's put the Horde and use them as the main villains of the She-Ra series. And we're off to the races. And in fighting the Horde and joining up with the Great Rebellion, which has members like, and all the new characters that we would see in She-Ra, like Bo and Glimmer and Cowl and Madame Raz, who's basically just Girl Orko, and all of them, He-Man helps out the Rebellion, and Battle-Cat too. Can't forget Battle-Cat. But he ends up meeting up with Force Captain Adora, who, as it turns out, is the person that he's supposed to give the sword to. And this leads to He-Man getting captured and defeated a couple of times, which that was rare. He-Man losing more than once to the same foe. That was exceedingly rare, but it happened here. And we learn that Force Captain Adora is actually Adam's twin sister that was abducted by Skeletor and Hordak as a child. Skeletor is actually the pupil of Hordak, and there's all these origins are tied with each other and everything, which has kind of become a fun part of the lore for a lot of fans, and we kind of enjoy all of that. But turns out that She-Ra's story is one of redemption, where she has to reject the evil of the Horde and everything that she's been led to believe her entire life, and become the heroic She-Ra and ultimately the leader of the rebellion. Now, I think She-Ra's redemption, or Adora's redemption, is a little rushed, where the rebellion forgives her way too quickly. She just kind of shows up and is like, yeah, I'm with you guys now, and they're like, yeah, awesome! And I was never a fan of that. I was like, yeah, I feel like they forgave her way too quickly. I feel like she needed to win them over a little bit. But the comics handled this much better, I think. The recent DC run on the comics, they do a wonderful thing with how they handle Adora and how they handle Shadow Weaver, who... Shadow Weaver is like Hordak's second in command and like the evil Lyn stand-in for the Horde and is the Great Witch. And she was kind of like Adora's mom and like raised her basically. And they take that whole idea to the next level in the comics, and it's really well handled, and I really enjoyed it. But here it feels a little underdeveloped, unfortunately. So, but chalk that up to another kind of fault with the overall narrative of a very disjointed movie. So it sounds like I'm kind of crapping on it, but what I will say for the film, in its defense, when it gets to those big moments, like the first time Adora becomes She-Ra, or the first time He-Man shows up and starts fighting the Horde lieutenants, or the first time we see Skeletor and Hordak interact, and of course when Skeletor shows up and again hijacks the movie for 10 minutes, it's absolutely delightful, and I love it because I love Skeletor. Skeletor also has one of his best lines in any episode to feature him, and it's become kind of a classic line among fans, where he's trying to contact King Randor, and he's like, Skeletor to King Randor, come in, you royal boob. He called him a royal boob. That's hilarious. Oh, God. Skeletor brings me so much joy. But anyway, it's a movie that falters in so many ways, but it has those big moments that, as a fan, it still brings a smile to my face when I see it. There's even a moment at the end of the movie where they get ready for the final battle, where they take Castle Bright Moon away from the Horde. And He-Man and She-Ra, or Adam and Adora transform into He-Man and She-Ra at the same time, so we get a double transformation. And that's one of those like fun fan moments that you kind of live for, especially as a kid. To see them both transform into their heroes, their heroic forms at the same time is really great. So I think the movie succeeds at like introducing She-Ra largely, and giving her a lot of great moments and introducing her whole character. Her horse, Swiftwind, who's kind of her version of Battle-Cat, I never liked the voice. They gave him like it's almost like he has throat cancer. It's very weird voice for a talking Pegasus horse or whatever. But in any case, the I think they introduced She-Ra very well. I think they introduced the series of She-Ra fairly well and introduced all the characters and everything. But again, it doesn't work that well as a movie. It's best viewed as a 5-part miniseries. Now, for the sake of this review, I watched the movie, which opens up with that cheesy By the Power of Love, For the Honor of Love, or whatever the song is, in the intro, which is weirdly like cheesy as hell, but also catchy as fuck. I don't know exactly how that worked, but and that whole opening credit sequence. I did watch the movie version for the purpose of this review, but I have, unlike Thundercats Ho, I have watched both versions. So I've watched the 5-part miniseries and the movie. I've watched both, and I think it works better as a 5-part miniseries. So keep in mind, if you ever watch this out of morbid curiosity and the movie seems wildly disjointed and the plot changes focus every 10 to 15 minutes, keep in mind it's 5 episodes strung together to make a movie. It's not really a movie. Unlike G.I. Joe and Transformers, this felt like G.I. Joe and Transformers, their movies felt like movies that got splintered into episodes. This feels like 5 episodes that got turned into a movie, and it doesn't work quite as well in this format. But it is enjoyable, and I get a lot of nostalgia. I revisit this movie every few years or so. It's like, I remember when this was my favorite movie at 3 years old. I was so innocent back then. But it is a fun movie, and I do... it gives me the nostalgia feel, so I guess I can give it points for that. And like I said, when you get to those really cool moments, it's like, yeah... kind of got a stupid smile on my face right now, so it hits me right in the feels and reminds me of childhood. So how can I fault it for anything other than that? And let's finish up with my Masters of the Universe talk by covering the live-action Masters of the Universe film, one that I remember watching distinctly one Christmas evening at a very young age. It was actually the same Christmas where I saw Transformers the movie for the first time. It was a crazy day. It was a crazy, crazy day. A lot of emotions were felt. It was like I got to see a live-action He-Man movie, and I got to watch Optimus Prime die right before my very eyes. But I also got to see the Flintstones meet the Jetsons, or Jetsons meet the Flintstones. I forget what it's called, but that was the nice, like, softer one that was easier for my childhood to digest. But anyway, Masters of the Universe, the live-action film, is one that has a very negative reputation. It's recognized as being one of the worst films of all time by a lot of people. And it was covered extensively in the documentary Electric Boogaloo, The History of Canon Films. If you have not seen that, it's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. Canon Films was the little studio that could, and they were just a total schlock factory with the heads of the studio, Golem and Globus, just producing whatever movies they could, whether it be the Breakin' movies or a Hercules movie or like every single ninja movie that came out in the 80s, a bunch of schlocky action movies, the Delta Force movies, the Death Wish sequels. They produced a lot of stuff, and most of it just unbearable garbage. And late in the decade, they tried to make 2 films that were like seen as bigger blockbusters that they thought could elevate the status of the studio. And those 2 investments were Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and this film, Masters of the Universe. Superman 4 is an abomination and easily one of the worst superhero films I've ever seen, but it is laughably bad. And it's even funnier in the context that they thought that this could be like a huge film to elevate the status of the studio. And the film is just absolutely abhorrent. Neither movie was a box office success and ultimately kind of tanked any long-term potential for the studio. But Masters of the Universe came around and it got a negative reputation. It didn't do that well at the box office and kind of gets remembered as a bad film. It's a movie that was hampered by its small budget. I remember being a kid, and there were many disappointments for me of things that were not included in the movie. Orko's not in the movie because they didn't have the budget to do him right. Snake Mountain is not in the movie because they didn't have the budget to do a Snake Mountain. We actually don't get many Eternian sets at all. All we see is Castle Grayskull and a surrounding desert, and that's pretty much it. We don't get to see much of the vast world of Eternia, which is a major disappointment all its own. Snake Mountain not being featured is the big one for me. And various characters like Trapjaw couldn't be done. Battle Cat's not in it, which He-Man without Battle Cat just feels wrong. But when you look at it through the lens of director Gary Goddard, it's like, look, I didn't have a budget. I can't do those things. I can't do Battle Cat in 1987 with no budget. That's not going to happen. Not without it looking terrible. So a lot of the issues with this movie can be washed away as they had no budget. And the biggest point of contention against this movie that some people don't like about it is that they leave the magical world of Eternia and come to Earth. And He-Man and Man-at-Arms and Teela and Gwildor, who is basically the Orko stand-in character, they cross paths with these two teenagers, one played by Courtney Cox, coming right off of the, what music video was she in? I think it was a Springsteen video. And I want to say, was it Aerosmith or Springsteen? I don't remember. I don't know why I would confuse those two, but I'm pretty sure it was Springsteen. She was the dancing girl in that music video, and she got this part not long after that, and then a few years after this, she would go on to be in one of the most popular and successful sitcoms of all time, but this is her younger days. And He-Man and all of his friends get wrapped up with these two teenage kids as they tried to hide the MacGuffin of the story, the Cosmic Key, from Skeletor and his forces. And that's basically your movie in a nutshell. And like I said, there are a lot of disappointments with this film as a He-Man fan, but most of it can be explained away with they had no budget. So all the things I wanted to see that you would expect to see in a He-Man movie couldn't be done. It just absolutely could not be done. And so working within those tight restrictions, they had to do the best that they could. And other examples of a small budget, some of the fighting is not edited real well. That's another problem. But I gotta be honest, there's a part of me that really likes this movie. And there are aspects of this movie that make me wish the film had gotten the budget that it deserved to make it even better than it is. I also think part of the problem with doing a He-Man movie in 1987, you kind of missed the boat. He-Man had already had his peak years. If you had made the movie, like Secret of the Sword came out in 85. That's the perfect time to do a He-Man movie. Doing one in 87, it's like, dude, by that point G.I. Joe had taken over, Transformers had taken over, and I even think G.I. Joe and Transformers were kind of like hit their peak by that point. We're on the downturn. So it was like, I think Ninja Turtles was just getting ready to start up at that point and be like the next big thing. So they kind of missed the boat to do a live-action He-Man movie. They didn't strike the iron when it was hot. So unfortunately, the movie wasn't what it could or should have been. And I know that there were a lot of other things that were planned to be done in the movie, but they could not be done. I know that there was supposed to be a scene where Teela, we first see her as a prisoner at Snake Mountain, and they show her escaping from Snake Mountain. All of that couldn't be filmed because they just didn't have the budget for it. The climactic sword fight between He-Man and Skeletor is lousy because, and I saw an interview with the set designer. I have this movie on Blu-ray, and I watched all the documentaries and behind-the-scenes stuff. And he said, I designed the interior set for Grayskull, which is a great-looking set, by the way. I designed that set to have the greatest sword fight of all time, and then they pulled the funding, and the film got halted, and we couldn't film it. So the fight that you see in the movie is the result of a small crew, the director, Dolph Lundgren, and a stuntman going into a warehouse and just filming a couple of minutes of action footage. And it's a very hastily put-together sword fight, but it was the best they could do, given the restrictions that were placed upon them. And it's almost a miracle that this movie even got completed, much less come out and be as mildly competent as it is. Now I'm going to talk about the things I actually like about the movie. The casting is generally pretty good. I think now Dolph Lundgren as He-Man looks the part. Performance is lousy. I'm not going to defend that, and it's weird with Dolph Lundgren because he actually became a better actor over time. You look at him in Creed 2, he gives a hell of a performance as Ivan Drago. I love him in that movie. I think he kind of steals the movie in a lot of ways. But here, I mean, he's just coming off of Rocky 4, and there's a funny story that's told on the Electric Boogaloo documentary where Sylvester Stallone was on set at one point in He-Man because they were doing He-Man and Over the Top, the Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling movie, which is another great gem of the of the 80s. And they were filming both movies simultaneously, so Stallone visited the set for the He-Man movie. And he noticed that Dolph was like the leading man in the film. And he's like, what, you like gave him lines? And it's like the fact that Sylvester Stallone of all people is like, whoa, you can't give that guy lines. What are you doing? Is really fucking funny to me. It tickled my funny bone. So Dolph Lundgren's performance not great. Apparently the plan was initially to have Dolph do the physical performance and then have somebody dub over him. And the director even talked about they got a guy to be the voice of He-Man. And they said it was perfect. And they wanted to use that guy, but Dolph had it in his contract that it had to be his voice as He-Man. Very similar to, like, what was that movie that Arnold did very early in his career? It may have been his first movie, like Hercules in New York or whatever that was, where Arnold in that entire movie, he's actually dubbed over. You don't get to hear, like, the thick accent and everything, and it's a terrible movie. It's not even worth watching, but except as, like, a curiosity from Arnold's early days. But they couldn't do the dub over voice, and I'd love to hear what it sounded like, what He-Man's voice would have sounded. Personally, if it were up to me, I would have just gotten the guy that did his voice on the cartoon, John Irwin. Just get his voice, and that would have been hilarious to hear the cartoon He-Man's voice coming out of Dolph Lundgren. That would have been great. But other than that, the acting is actually pretty good. John Cypher as Man-at-Arms is, like, low-key the best casting in the film. He looks the part, he acts well, he's charming. I love him as Duncan. I think he's great. Chelsea Fields is okay as Teela, you know, the strong, badass female type. She's okay. Isn't given a whole lot to do, but she's okay. I like, God, who played the Sorceress? She's a prisoner the entire movie, but I kind of like her. Christina Pickles, I think her name is. I could be getting that wrong. She played Courtney Cox's mom on Friends, oddly enough. Weird coincidence there, but I generally liked her. I like Billy Barty as Gwildor. I know Gwildor is like an Orko stand-in, dollar store Orko, and is a comedy relief character, but when he's not doing goofy shit and he's actually, like, acting, he's actually fairly good. There's a scene late in the film where he's giving advice to the teenage boy, and the boy's like, I'm nothing special, there are a million of me, and then he's like, only one of you, Kevin. Only one of anybody. That's one of the best lines in the movie. So I generally like Billy Barty in this. As the maker of the Cosmic Key and the causer of all the problems that persist throughout the film. The Cosmic Key being the device that opens all the gateways that allow them to go from Eternia to Earth and various other places, and it's all based on musical tones, which is why the teenage boy is perfect to help them, because he's a musician, so he's able to help discover the tones to help get them back to Eternia late in the movie and everything. But which all of that's kind of silly, but it's Meg Foster plays Evil Lynn, and her eyes are very striking. I wasn't surprised years later when she was cast to play Hera in Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, because she does a terrific job and just absolutely looks the part, and I love her as Evil Lynn. And, of course, the real highlight is Frank Langella as Skeletor, who completely goes against the cartoon in this portrayal, but he portrays Skeletor as a almost Shakespearean figure, and gives these monologues that are so quotable and so great. Like, again, I have a friend that we quote this movie to each other, and we always quote Skeletor lines. That whole monologue where he gains the powers of Castle Grayskull is probably the main highlight of the movie, and it's like, I could watch that monologue all day long. He's fantastic. And this could have easily been like a one-note villain, but he carries it with such gravitas. And the line delivery is so great that I just love watching him. He's just absolutely magnetic on screen. Some people don't like the makeup. I like it because it's skull-like. It's not... Skeletor was almost impossible to do, because if you go like the cartoon, it's going to look silly, where it's just a floating skull there. That would be hard to translate to film. And going with the makeup the way they did, they captured skull-like features in his face, but still allowed for us to see enough of Frank Langella's face to where he could use his facial expressions to help carry the performance as well. So I thought Frank Langella did a great job with Skeletor, and is the main highlight of the movie, and the main reason, I think, to check out the movie. I think he's great, especially when he's either talking to Evil Lynn, like his whole speech about how he can't kill He-Man, because if he kills him, He-Man will become a martyr, and it's like, no, I want to break him. And that's all great. No, Skeletor is absolutely delightful in this film. I could watch him all day. And again, he completely plays against the cartoon, which I love. But he's fantastic in this. And this is a movie that's kind of developed a cult following. And he seems to be the main talking point of the movie. For people that defend this movie, they're all like, yeah, but Frank Langella's Skeletor is great in this. And it's true. And I also like the movie for really trying to capture the essence of the property. You can't be fully like the cartoon show because that's too kiddie, and it tries to make the material a little bit more mature, but it really feels more like the old mini comics that came with the toys, like the original 4 mini comics that came with the toys, more in that vein, that full-on barbarian meets science fiction, Conan the Barbarian meets Flash Gordon type of feel. And this movie, I felt, kind of captured that as best they could, given the restrictions. Again, you can't see as much of Eternia as I would have liked, although I do like Castle Grayskull. I like that version of Castle Grayskull. The opening prologue is great. And I also love that the movie... They do the opening prologue explaining what Castle Grayskull is, then you get the opening credits, which was clearly ripping off the Richard Donner Superman movie. It's Bill Conti doing the music. Bill Conti, who I love his work from the Rocky series. And here, the music is generally good, but it does sound like he's kind of ripping off John Williams' Superman score, but I let it slide, because it does sound pretty good. And the movie begins with Skeletor in charge. He's conquered Castle Grayskull, which if you watch the show, I mean, that's like something that you waited to see, and here he's done it before the movie even began. It's like, oh shit, we're starting off, it's the sorceress is his prisoner, he's conquered Grayskull, and now He-Man's a rebel. It's like, oh man, shit's on. Shit is on. And there are a lot of cool moments like that. It's like if you have a knowledge of the property or the cartoon show or the comics and the toy line or whatever, there are those really fun moments. And again, it's when you get to that point at the end where He-Man's fighting through and Skeletor's got the sword of Grayskull, the sword of power, trapped, and He-Man is like trying to grab for the sword, but Skeletor keeps zapping him. And then He-Man fights through the pain, grabs the sword, lifts it up, and says, I have the power, of course, because it's Dolph Lundgren's accent. It sounds like, I have the power. And there's a lot of lines that Lundgren says here that, we as fans, we kind of make fun of. One that a friend of mine, he meets up with the sorceress while she's in captivity, and he says, he's draining your power. But with the heavy accent, he comes out as he's draining your power. And my friend and I, we make fun of that all the time. So it's got that like joy of being like a so bad it's good movie, but at the same time it's got elements that I legitimately enjoy about the movie, whether it be Frank Langella's performance or even the drama at the end. I mean, at the end when it looks like Skeletor's won, it's like, holy shit, like I never thought I would ever see this on the cartoon show. And I know that the director, he pulled a lot of inspiration from the New Gods DC comics, which is where Darkseid came about. And the main thing that he was featured in beyond, I think he's known more now as like a Superman villain more than anything else. But the New Gods is where he, stemmed from originally. And I know that they borrowed a lot from that. And there is that kind of influence at play there, which I also kind of like. There's a lot of things that I actually do enjoy about this film, but, you give it a bigger budget, you give it a little bit more time, you let them do everything that they wanted to do, this would probably be considered more of a classic. As is, it is kind of a cult classic. There are people that enjoy this movie and legitimately like it. I'm one of them. I consider myself one of them, and I think director Gary Goddard deserves an A for effort, because when you look at the situation that he was in trying to make this movie happen, it's miraculous that it even got finished. But, unfortunately, it does have those falters and those problems that I did talk about, like, He-Man not having the best performance, which He-Man is supposed to be the main character, and if his actor's not good, that's a huge problem with the film. But I think the movie deserves an A for effort, maybe a C for execution, and they did the best they could with what they had, and I can respect the effort here. And you know what? With all the properties that I've liked over the years that have gotten movies, I lived through the '98 Godzilla film, I lived through the Michael Bay Transformers films and other stuff like that. That stuff comes and goes and fades, but Masters of the Universe, there's something about that movie that keeps me coming back to it. Whether it be Frank Langella's performance or various other cool moments sprinkled throughout the film. There was something about it that keeps me coming back to it. Like, every so often I'll go back and rewatch that film and enjoy it. So, I think it deserves more credit than it gets. I don't think it's as bad as its reputation. It's my personal opinion. And it's funny, my brother-in-law saw this movie for the first time a couple months ago. And his take on it was very interesting. He was like, okay, I can understand why people hated this back in the 80s. By today's standards, this movie is a masterpiece. And I'm like, holy shit, that's an indictment of modern filmmaking, that's for sure. But he's like, by today's standards, film production has gotten so shitty lately. Like, this movie actually looks pretty good by comparison. I'm like, whoa, that's heavy damnation there of an entire industry. But the Masters of the Universe film, I love it. I adore it. It's not the best film. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's like a great film that you need to go out of your way and see. I'm not saying it's a misunderstood classic. I'm saying it's a movie that has obvious problems, but the stuff that I like about it, I really like, and that's why I keep coming back to the film. So it gets a thumbs up from me. Alright, let's finally wrap this video up. I'm at almost 2 hours here, so let's put a lid on this with the final movie that I watched, another 80s cartoon that got a movie, and you might be questioning my sanity for watching this, but it came in a recommendation from a friend of mine who insisted that I check it out. Rainbow Brite and the Star Stealer. Now, this is a movie that I saw when I was really, really young. My sister got it for Christmas, and I remember watching it with her. Rainbow Brite was not my thing. Back then it was a lot more like, these are the boy shows, these are the girl shows, and my sister liked the boy shows typically, but I did not like the girl shows. And actually, as far as the girl shows go, I remember there was a My Little Pony, it was either a movie or an episode or something, where the villain was like Satan and he turned the ponies into demons. And I thought it was the most metal thing I'd ever seen, and I kind of loved it. I was like 5 or 6 when I saw it. And I was like, whoa, My Little Pony got cool! Look at that! But generally, the girl shows just didn't appeal to me, because they were typically like bouncy and cutesy and friendly, and I'm like, the Strawberry Shortcakes and the Care Bears, which Care Bears wasn't strictly a girl show, I guess, but it was like, I didn't like it. I didn't care for the Care Bears. Mainly because I just thought their whole approach to be like, just smile and be happy, don't be sad. And I'm like, sometimes I want to feel sad and angry, you stupid fucking bear. These are thoughts that were going through my head at 5 years old. It's like, leave me the fuck alone, Jesus. Stop telling me how to feel, dickweed. I was a shitty little kid. But anyway, so Rainbow Brite was not in my wheelhouse, not one of my things. I remember watching the movie, but I have like virtually no memory of it. I remember that it existed, and I know my sister had it, and I know I watched it, but none of it stayed with me. And then a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine was like, oh dude, do you remember the Rainbow, because we got on the topic of like cartoons that we watched as kids, and he was like, dude, do you remember the Rainbow Brite movie? And I'm like, I know of it. I'm like, yeah, dude, you should totally watch that again. I'm like, okay, dude, I want you to say that out loud. I was like, I want you to watch the Rainbow Brite movie again. And I'm like, buddy, why do you want me to watch the Rainbow Brite movie? He's like, dude, seriously, it's kind of weird and fucked up. You should totally watch this movie. And I'm like, all right, I'll give it a try. I'll give it a watch. And I turn on the movie, and within the first, 10 minutes, I'm ready to murder my friend, because they open up with a song, and they're in Rainbow Land, and everything's all pretty and colorful, and spring's here, and they talk to their little buddies, their animal buddies, and there are these creepy little kids that sing and dance. One of them looks like Sexy Vegan from that Dr. Phil episode. And I'm like, this is like every nightmare I ever had just banded together and decided to make a recruitment video. This is like the creepiest thing I've ever watched. And one of Rainbow Brite's, one thing that stayed with me, one of Rainbow Brite's little buddies is named Twink. And I'm like, I'm going to assume that that's an innocent little gaffe on their part, and they didn't really know what the word twink meant. But I'm going to assume total innocence on their part there. But in any case, at first, after the first 10 minutes, I'm like, this is going to be miserable. this is going to be so bad. And then they introduce us to the characters of, God, what are their names? Murky and Lurky, I believe. Now, from what I could gather, these are the main villains on the TV show, and they're like incompetent, bumbling morons that want to bring gloom and darkness to the world, where Rainbow Brite wants to bring color and sunshine everywhere. And I'm like, I'm hating this. I am just hating this. And poor Peter Cullen is the voice of one of the... I don't know which one's Murky and which one's Lurky, but he's the voice of the one that looks like Super Mario. Who's like the leader of the two morons. I'm going to assume Murky, since they're called Murky and Lurky. But he's the voice of it. I'm like, oh, poor guy. I guess it's a paycheck, but it's like not his best work, unfortunately. I'm like, you were Optimus Prime and Eeyore, and you get stuck doing this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But so I'm thinking initially, it's like, all right, so this is just gonna be a long episode of the show. And there was a prologue with like a bratty princess who wants to steal a giant crystal or whatever. And we don't know what that means yet. And I'm like, whatever. Like, that didn't really register with me, and I didn't. I assume it's going to be the main focus of the plot, but I didn't really think one way of it or the other. So I'm ready to dread every minute of this movie. But then the robot horse shows up, and once the robot horse shows up and serves as like a messenger to Rainbow Brite, it's like, look, there's this problem going on across the galaxy where this evil princess, the crystal that she wants to steal, is a planet-sized crystal that all light has to pass through, or else the world doesn't have color and the planet Earth will be in a eternal winter. And there's this boy that Rainbow Brite talks to that they explain is the only person on planet Earth that can see her, which, what the hell did he do to deserve that punishment? I don't know, but it's like, the boy serves no purpose other than being like a stand-in to show us what's going on planet Earth while Rainbow Brite is off having her adventure on her magic flying horse and her magic rainbows and everything. So the robot horse shows up and tells her what's going on, and she goes off across the galaxy to stop the princess from stealing this planet-sized crystal. And from that point onward, the movie gets really dark, really weird, and kind of strangely enjoyable. Like, I don't know how they righted the ship and got there, but it's got this weird, like, apocalyptic vibe to it, where if the princess is successful in stealing this giant crystal, this planet-sized crystal, life will be destroyed across the universe, but she doesn't care because she's a spoiled brat. She wants her crystal. I'm like, I love petty shit like that. And they show her, like, enslaving the race of people that live on the crystal with her evil robots, and they, like, build a giant net that's, like, netting the giant crystal, and she's gonna, like, drag it away with her spaceship. I'm like, that is fucking... You know, you could have just pitched what she could have done instead is just, pitched a tent and just claimed ownership of the real estate, because I guess nobody truly owns the planet, and just kicked everybody off. Which would also be cruel, but she wouldn't also be destroying the universe in the process. I'm just saying, it's like, better to own it outright and force people off of it rather than net it and drag it away, because it's like, where are you going to put it? Like, where the hell are you going to put that thing? I don't know. But, you get all this, like, weird, dark and gloomy imagery and the different planets that they go to. The princess's castle is, like, really dark and creepy and weird looking. A lot of her soldiers are dark and creepy and weird looking. And there's this overall, like, kind of, like, dark and bizarre vibe to it that I would have never expected from a Rainbow Brite movie. And I'm like, I'm shocked I don't remember this stuff from the first time I watched it as a kid. They introduce another character who's a boy, who's, like, the boy Rainbow Brite, I guess. And he's kind of a dickhead. He's kind of a dickhead. It's like, oh, they sent a girl to help me? That's stupid. I'm like, are we really going to play this game? Okay. I guess we're doing this. Like, all right, so Chris the dickhead. And I was like, and he's so useless. I'm like, why are you even here? Like, just let Rainbow Brite take over the movie. I don't care at this point. She's at least useful. You're not. The robot horse is pretty cool, though. I will give it credit. The robot horse is pretty cool. But, There's a lot of stuff in the writing that doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. I mentioned Murky and Lurky, and they follow Rainbow Brite around the entire movie, but hardly ever cross paths with her, and ultimately have no impact on the plot. So I'm wondering, like, why are they even here? Other than the fact that they're on the cartoon show, and I guess I never watched the cartoon show, so I can't tell you anything about it. But the only reasoning I can think of for why they would even be in this movie is because it's expected, because they're in the cartoon show. Because they ultimately have no bearing on the plot at all whatsoever. It's like, I would have rather they just stayed with the princess, honestly, because these two are just bizarre comic relief distractions that offer nothing. Because they're not that funny, and they have absolutely no impact on the plot. So I'm like, what was the point of even having them here? I don't know. Aside from the expectation that, oh, they're on the show, so they've got to be in the movie. But, so there's a lot of stuff in this movie that makes absolutely no sense. However, to my friend's credit, he was right. It is a little weird. It is a little creepy. It has an apocalyptic vibe to it that I would have never expected out of a Rainbow Brite movie. And it's shockingly well animated. It actually does look really good as far as the animation goes. I did a little bit of research into the movie, and according to its IMDb page, the production schedule was really rushed, and it was like 3 months to produce an animated film, which is unheard of. I'm like, there's no way it only took them 3 months to make this thing, because it looks way better than it has any right to. For a movie that had a 3-month production to look as good as it does is kind of amazing. I'm not saying it's the best looking animated film of all time. I'm just saying the animation is shockingly good for something that supposedly had a very rushed production. I actually didn't hate it. Despite what I thought I was getting myself into, which is I'm kind of amazed. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty much it. I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it. And so, you know what? I'm actually going to remember this movie. I will give it credit for that. I am absolutely going to remember this movie. So, Rainbow Brite and the Star Stealer. Never expected to feel any kind of positive vibes towards this movie, but it surprised me. So, there you go. And that concludes this week's weekly movie and TV show review video. Next week, we're getting into October, so I want to do something a little bit more horror related. So I've got something in line for that. And also, if you're sick of me talking about children's cartoons that I watched when I was a kid, have no fear, because we're going to do a little bit of horror, but we're also going to do an action movie franchise that I wanted to review last year but didn't get the time to do it. But now I'm going to do it. And so I will have that for you up next week. So we're going to get a little bit more hardcore next week, I promise. But that is all I have for you now. So thanks again, everybody, for watching, and enjoy your weekend. I will see you all later.